Even Donald Trump's own appointed judges believe in the power of the press and the First Amendment to hold tyrants and oppressors and bloodsuckers at bay. We cover that and the new ruling by Trevor McFadden to get Associated Press back its press credentials on Legal AF. Take a listen. Associated Press, through its wire services 1/2 of the world's population. I mean, that's even better. That's better than McDonald's. I mean, 2.5, whatever billion people get their news in some way from the Associated Press. And they are, according to the judge, hemorrhaging money because they've been banned and barred from doing their job and getting access to the president in the White House. And I was a little troubled when the temporary restraining order was denied. We were like, uh-oh. I thought it was because they moved too late. Because you got to move kind of quick on a TRO. And I was like, what are they waiting for? And I was like, all right, well, let's just wait to see what happens at preliminary injunction time. And now we've got the order from Trump's own judge, not a liberal, not a Marxist, not a corrupt person, Trevor McFadden. Karen, what did you make of the order, and what do you think it means for at least some of the judges on the DC court?
Yeah, so I mean, look, let's just back up for a minute and talk about what's happening here. So the press has a First Amendment right to be present and to report on things, and the press has as much of First Amendment right as anybody else has. And so that is something that if you're going to make rules that infringes on someone's constitutional rights, that has the highest scrutiny that by the courts, meaning you cannot you can't just do things, right? You have to have really good reasons. So let's just, again, have a little mini breakout session on the First Amendment. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Okay, so it goes on after that, but it specifically lists the press in there. And so I think that's an important thing to remind everybody. And it really protects the right of individuals and organizations to publish information and opinions without any government censorship or control. So Trump essentially barred the Associated Press from physically covering events while he let other reporters in. And traditionally, the AP always had a front row seat. They were always asked the first question, partly because what they're known for is neutrality. They are the ones that they don't really have a point of view and never really have. They're neutral. And then everybody else gets news, smaller news organizations, local news organizations, or international news organizations will take the information and will frame it from their point of view, right? It could be right, it could be left, it could be for some other perspective, it could be for some other reason. But that's what the Associated Press is. It's a tremendous service to the press at large. And so what happened here, and so again, they're known to be neutral. They are not known to be left-wing or anti-Trump or anything like that. But what they decided to do was not rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And Trump decided to block them from having access to those live briefings. So so really what this judge said in a really sharply worded opinion, I have to say, for any judge, let alone a Trump appointee, was basically, you're not allowed to give a viewpoint-based denial. It has to be content neutral. And those are sort of terms of art when you're talking about First Amendment and free speech. And Trump was trying to say, oh, we're just not giving them extra special access. But that's not what they were asking for. They weren't asking for extra special access. What they were really asking for is just a level playing field. So if you are letting other reporters in, then they have to be let in too. They weren't asking for, like, reporters don't get to be in the in the Situation Room or the Oval Office, or you don't have a right to that unless, of course, you're inviting the press into that, to Air Force One, to all the places that you see pool reporters go. And if you're doing that, you have to let them in too. And you certainly can't bar them from for reasons because you don't like the content of what they're reporting. So, for example, he's not allowed to say, I'm only allowing Fox News and Newsmax and places like that. He has to allow everyone in if he's going to allow them in. I also thought it was interesting, and I didn't realize this, that the iconic photograph where after Trump was shot and he raises his fist in the air and he has blood coming down his face with the flag in the background, that was taken from an AP photographer, right? Like the AP kind of gives him good and bad, they're just neutral. They just report things. And so that he would go after them really says a lot. But the judge was, I think he said some pretty good wording in there. He said things like, under the First Amendment, if the government opens the door to some journalists, be it in the Oval Office, the East Room, or elsewhere, it cannot then shut those doors to other journalists because of their viewpoints. The Constitution requires no less. So, and Trump, the Trump officials were very explicit and brazen. They don't even pretextually try to pretend that it's anything else. They say why they did it, which helps. It helps judges kind of say, look, you're not allowed to do what you're saying you're going to do. And so it was a pretty strongly worded decision by Judge McFadden. And basically he said, that the order said you shall immediately rescind your viewpoint denial to the Associated Press and any other viewpoint related journalists, and gave a stay of a few days so that if they want to appeal this decision, he can go and appeal it. I think this is one that even the Supreme Court is going to say you're not allowed to do that. I mean, it's one of the first things I learned in con law in first year of law school, right? It's you really have to be content neutral when you're infringing on someone's First Amendment rights.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought McFadden, I'm going to read a couple of things from McFadden. I thought McFadden slyly took a shot at Donald Trump, even though he was appointed by Donald Trump. On page 14 of his order, in talking about the historical underpinnings of the First Amendment, so important, freedom of the press, we know it well here on the Midas Touch Network as an independent entity. People see the difference in our approach and viewpoint because we're not beholden to corporate overlords or others. We're beholden to our own conscience when we write. But who does this sound like? I don't think he just pulled this one out of Roget's Thesaurus or book of quotations. Here's what he wrote on page 14 in talking about the First Amendment and the Federalists who helped, who wrote in order to promote the Constitution. He said, the pseudonymic writer Philadelphiensis, somebody writing under a pseudonym, for instance, stressed that the free press was, quote, the scourge of tyrants, oppressors, villains, and bloodsuckers, the bulwark of freedom that caused the haughtiest lordling to tremble, and an inestimable jewel that places the poorest citizen on a level with the richest demagogue. Who are the rich demagogues, tyrants, oppressors, and bloodsuckers in this story? I don't think that was by accident, even though he was a Trumper. He later talked about the First Amendment and the importance of the press this way on page 16. He said, these immediate and forceful backlashes to attacks on the press underscore how Americans understood the First Amendment in the early centuries. They saw this foremost protection as safeguarding their natural right to heap honest criticism upon the government without fear of official reprisal. That's what we do every day right here. We're trying to heap honest criticism without fear, although we have a little fear, a fear of reprisal. I just thought the structure of his memo, his memorandum opinion, was interesting too. No Democrat would have thought to write it this way. But he started with almost like, don't bash me. I'm not stopping you from doing the following 6 or 7 things. But you've gone too far, Trump, with brazenly breaching the First Amendment by punishing Associated Press, particularly because they won't adopt your Gulf of America in their style book. You said they're neutral. I agree with you, except Susie Weil, the chief of staff, she said, no, they've weaponized their style book. They've weaponized their dictionary. I really don't understand what that means or how people think of the Associated Press. I think of them as having almost no point of view, let alone a point of view. But this is how he starts it, Karen. It's very interesting. He says, about 2 months ago, President Donald Trump renamed the Gulf of Mexico. It's almost laughable at how simplistically he puts it. The Gulf of America, period. It's almost cutting in its criticism. The Associated Press did not follow suit. For that editorial choice, the White House sharply curtailed the AP's access to coveted, tightly controlled media events with the president. The AP now sues, seeking a preliminary injunction, enjoining the government from excluding it because of its viewpoint. And then he says, today the court grants that relief. But this injunction does not, now he's given the list of things that he's not doing, does not limit the various permissible reasons the government may have for excluding journalists from limited access events. It does not mandate that all eligible journalists, or indeed any journalists at all, be given access to the president in a non-public space. It does not prohibit government officials from freely choosing which journalists they want to sit down with for interviews and which questions they answer. And it certainly doesn't prevent senior officials from publicly expressing their own views. You can still all do that. But then he hits it with exactly the way you let off, or you mentioned just recently. No, the court simply holds that under the First Amendment, if the government opens its doors to some journalists, be it the Oval Office, the East Room, or elsewhere, it cannot then shut the doors to other journalists because of their viewpoints. The Constitution requires no less. I just think the whole structure, there is power in the structure of it, and almost like a satirical, a satire of this administration baked into. They're going to be studying Trevor McFadden here and what he was really trying to accomplish. And what I haven't heard, and if people found it, put it in our chat tonight, is Donald Trump immediately bashing Trevor McFadden, his own judge, calling him a liberal, Marxist, criminal, corrupt, fascist, left-wing, nothing. So the only part I want to leave it on right here is that McFadden did stay the order, meaning it's in place, they're back in the game, except he stayed his order until the 13th of April, giving Trump time to go to the D.C. Court of Appeals on his way to the United States Supreme Court. And then we're going to have to see. You and I are going to spend a considerable amount of time talking about the Supreme Court in the second half of this show today and what they're doing and why it's so hard to predict what they're going to do. Welcome back. That's a full-length podcast we do every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Midas Touch Network. It's called Legal AF for a reason. If you didn't know why, now you do. Wednesdays, Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, and me. Saturdays, my co-founder, Ben Mycelis, and me. And then hot takes like this every hour on the Midas Touch Network and on Legal AF MTN, our YouTube channel. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.